We are successfully on live. So we are here for the third in our live series of Burn Bright and Not Out. It's the Toolkit series where we're bringing you tools that are going to help you with your burnout rebellion. And today I'm super, super, super excited to have Caroline Pankhurst with me. She's the founder of Be Braver. She's a business consultant and a researcher in psychology and philosophy of courage. And I do think courage is the question that I get asked the most about in the Burnout Rebellion. Like, how can we be courageous? How can we step forward and do the things that we want to do? So everyone's going to love having you here today, Caroline. So tell us a little bit more about Be Braver and the concept behind it.
Oh, well, thank you, first of all, for having me here. It's so lovely to be here. And Be Braver actually started really with a question that I asked myself after having gone to the theatre one day, which was a play about the suffragettes. And my question was, what differentiates an ordinary woman like me from these extraordinary change makers in history that had been able to make decisions and take actions which had shifted society so dramatically, but also had cost them so much? And how did they repeatedly keep making those decisions? And what was it? So I was studying psychology at the time, and I was really interested in leadership and these amazing women. And actually, what I landed on was the fact that they didn't have anything that I didn't have. But what differentiated them was their ability to be able to practice courage. So I then started to think about, how do I understand what courage is? What's the difference between courage and bravery? Why did I not see bravery and courage as a trait that women have? Was it a trait even? What was it? So that is the beginning of how it all started. And actually, now that the work that I do in Be Braver, which is predominantly in organisations, there's kind of like two strands to the work that I do. One is community-based work for accelerating and advancing women, obviously with the Pankhurst name. That's very important to the work that I do. And then the second part to the work is about doing work within organisations, helping them to create courageous cultures, courageous leaders, courageous teams. And all of the work and all of the research has by and large been validated by my very first model of the suffragettes. So that's how it all started. Brave women.
Yeah,
by brave women.
I mean, I really love that story. The fact that you went to the theatre, you saw this play, and you're thinking, well, how am I different to these women? And the only difference really is the courage that is shown. And I think there are so many people, particularly right now, that are starting to rethink their lives. I think there was an impact of the pandemic, but also I think there's just a different vibe going on in the world at the moment. And there are a lot of people thinking, I want to change something about my life. It could be anything. It could be their relationships, their careers, what it is they want to do, a dream that they feel that they've never reached. And they're thinking, well, it's all right, these two sitting on here and saying, have a bit of courage. But where should we start? If we want to make a courageous decision, where should we be starting?
Well, we don't just decide to be courageous just for the sake of it, do we? It has to exist in relation to something. It's one of the things that I often say is we don't just wander around being brave and courageous for the sake of it, because that would just be reckless or narcissistic or whatever it would be. So it has to be because you understand that there is something that you want to move towards. So understanding what you're trying to move towards is obviously one of the most critical things to do. And what you gain from making that change, I think the biggest thing is, for a lot of people, is to actually understand that a condition of doing something courageous is the fact that there is a risk there. There is uncertainty there, and we know all the psychology around the fact that We tend to avoid things that are uncertain, that are fearful. We've got all those biases in our brains that help predict things that we think are going to keep us safe. But we also know that the brain tells us lies as well. And it's not always working in. I talk about it sometimes as a bit like being an overprotective sibling, where it doesn't realize that you're as well equipped as you are to deal with uncertainty and difficult decisions and undesirable outcomes and all that sort of stuff. But actually you are. You've never been more equipped to do brave and difficult things than you are today, because you've got more experience now than you ever have. And actually, you've been making risk based decisions and doing brave, difficult, and uncomfortable things since the day that you were born. So you're the bravest today that you've ever been already, anyway, before you even start. So, first off, go back and have a look at all the brave things that you have done, and don't diminish and sweep them under the carpet. Bravery and courage is about recognizing that in order to do something that is meaningful, that is noble, that is worthwhile, that is going to make a difference, whether that's in your life, your organization, your business, whatever it is, it's going to require you to do something where you can't predict with certainty what the outcome is going to be. And actually, once you get your head around that and recognize that there are just things, systems, power, structures, inequities, even fears that you may have, once you recognize that those things are the uncertainty and you can't control those, then what you're left with is the ability to be able to make a decision. And actually, the most important thing is the fact that you made the decision. You've held space for the fact that you can't control the outcome. You're prepared for it. You've done it in a values aligned way. So you sort of like you've already won.
Mm.
You've moved forward to the person that you are becoming, for the, you know, done whatever you've done for the reasons that you know are the right things to do, and you know that you're better off for having tried than not done it at all. So
Mm.
I think once we get to the point where we understand what courage actually is and how to practice it, everything starts to change then, because everything becomes possible and you just find more and more of yourself. The Be Braver Collective, they talk about it as being brave washed. um, they talk about being brave ready and brave washed, and the fact that you can put it for fun things. Everything that everybody talks about with courage and bravery is always about like awful things, but actually there's loads of risks that we can take that are joyful things that move us towards happiness and excitement and, love and things like that.
Mm. I mean, it just feels such an expansive energy when you talk about it in that way. And a few comments came up while you were talking. Lots of people talking about the systems which we're in, which you
Mm,
were mentioning there, and that's where a lot of our uncertainty is coming from, is all these systems, the inequity, and
mm,
take that away, or we recognise that that's there, we can still make the decision, and then we can go forward. And there was someone else that put something really beautiful. They said it's the difference between doing something where we feel uplifted, making a choice that makes us feel uplifted, as
mm,
working in something that actually isn't perhaps aligning with our values. And I think one of the great things about your work is not only do you share everything that you do in such a way that feels positive and uplifting, and I already feel more courageous just having the
mm.
conversation,
Well,
is
that's a win.
yeah,
That's a win.
something right now. I don't know what it is, but it's going to be something. Um, but you produce a lot of artwork that helps people to understand more what you mean when you talk about being courageous. Sorry, and I do love that term, brave washed. I want brave washed. Doesn't everyone want to be brave washed? That's amazing. But there was a particular piece of artwork that you had up. I think it was either on Substack or Instagram. That was about values, and being using values as your mirror and being driven by your values in terms of your courage. Now, what did you mean by that when you shared that?
So I sort of think that I talk about values as being like lenses, like ridiculously oversized glasses that I'm still not 100% sure about, but values I am sure about. Um, and that, when we have to make, particularly because I work a lot, obviously, in leadership spaces, and often we're needing to make decisions where neither option is going to lead to a brilliant outcome. Sometimes life just presents us with things where we do have to make difficult decisions, and it's not always just a case of, well, if I don't do this, I don't stand a chance of getting a promotion. Sometimes it's like, I'm going to have to let somebody in the team go, and they're both really worthy of being here, or whatever it might be. So how do we make those decisions when things seem really difficult? And I just think that our our own personal values, there's obviously organizational values, but if we're talking about individuals here, can really help us with those, or relationships, or problems within your family, or whatever it might be, to use as like looking glasses to look through and go, well, if I don't know, if integrity is one of your values, like if I act with integrity in this moment, what does that how does that inform the decisions that I should make? And if I don't act with integrity, because we know that they are the things that define us and are what we have to live with, how we remember our lives, how we look back on things, how we feel at our best. And we know that when we act out of alignment with our values, when we're not living truthfully to them, that is when we get lots of shame and guilt, and things start to eat away at us. So I sort of think really they are the anchors that you can sort of hang on to when things are really difficult and uncertain. And sometimes we are going to make the wrong decision, and things aren't going to go the way that we want them to. But at least then we can hang on to go, I know I did that for the right reasons, because it was me living in alignment with the things that I believe to be true about what a good person should be and what is right for me. Mm, Why I talk about, you know, leaning on your values, and sort of thinking about, um, how do you operationalize them as well? Like, what do they look like in your life when you're living them on full volume? And like, how can they give you more of the things that fill your cup as well?
Yeah. And I think when I'm piecing this together, hearing you talk about how we can be more courageous, it feels like if I start with my values, that's a really good place to start.
Mm.
Making any decision, obviously not what you're having for dinner, hopefully, isn't a courageous decision. It depends what's in front of you, obviously. Uh, but
Eating some of my food can sometimes be courageous for other people.
and I think, if your most decisions, other than hopefully those things, but you're thinking that decision is courageous, whether I take that decision in my job, whether I go for that promotion, whether I do this, or even things like if I am going to quit my job, or if I'm going to end this relationship, or whether I'm going to spend some time working on this relationship, or actually thinking, no, I'm gonna cut it. What is out there for me. So the first thing we need to do, it sounds like, is we need to go, well, what's our values? What is my most value-led decision at this point?
Mm.
And there is always that risk that the decision that we make, no matter how courageous, could not work out. And it reminds me of a piece that you wrote, which I absolutely love. Because obviously there's a relatively famous book about it, which is called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway.
Yeah.
And you wrote an article where you said, is this possibly the worst advice you could give somebody? Now, why did you mention that? Why was that something that you wanted to pick up on?
Well, for a start off, fear is not necessarily a bad thing. Like, it actually serves a purpose. And I've read, obviously there's loads of research into um courage, and everybody thinks that, everybody, when they think of courage, pretty much, and most of the research, it's all military stuff. It's a bit whistleblowing in organizations, and it's often very much looking at things like Carnegie Awards that they have in America, I think it is, but it's very heroic, very physical, very brave, very out there, very visible. And in actual fact, sometimes it is, I talk about quiet courage and personal bravery, and it being a decision to take a risk. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to experience fear. And sometimes we need to listen to some of those fears, because sometimes the risks do need heeding. If we don't listen to to fears and some of the risks, that's where we get sort of really reckless decision making. We get reckless leadership. We don't want to be a coward on the one extreme, but we don't want to be reckless either. And I think actually sometimes, and women particularly, with all the numerous threats and fears that we are living with, sometimes in our homes, some of those fears are to be heeded. And sometimes courage is about saying, not yet, not now, in a while. It's not about, always taking great big leaps and things, because I sometimes think it sounds like a bit of a paradox in some ways, but you need to be safe to be able to be courageous. Because if you're not, you can end up in a worse situation. And I'm thinking particularly, about women that are in very abusive relationships, situations where, I do a lot of work with Greater Manchester for women and girls, and sometimes we can have all these conversations in quite privileged bubbles online. We've all got access to the internet, we've all got mobile phones and all that sort of stuff, but there's a lot of poverty in the world as well, and what risk looks like for one person is comfort for another. So it is a massive topic.
I just thought about 50 questions. I'm going to have to get you to come on the podcast, I think, because there's so much within this that we can unpick. I think one thing that I want to pick up on there is the fact that it is really important to address that risk is different for everybody, because you might have two separate people that are thinking about taking a new position in their life, whatever that may be, and it could be the same risk that they're looking at, but actually it's totally different for them.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about being values driven, but how do I make that decision then? If I know that it's risky, how do I make that decision of whether it's too risky for me right now or whether I could be courageous? Does that make sense?
Yes. I mean, you can be. It's a choice, isn't it? It's not about whether you can be courageous. You can be courageous. So when you were talking earlier on, and you were asking about, and I'm going to look like I'm winding off in a different direction, but I am coming back to the answer. You asked about, how can we be courageous? And it sounds like it starts with values. So one of the things so I've got a few models that I've developed over my research thing, and one of them is the Be Braver mindset, which is a model. It's got 8 pillars to it, and there's 4. And I remember at the beginning I said I modelled it originally on the suffragettes, and I think that this is how we get to being able to make brave and courageous decisions. So I go clarity, confidence. I've got a few words on that as well. Connection and courage. So clarity is all around knowing what your beliefs are, your vision is, who you want to be, who you want to become. And that in itself actually can be really challenging and rebellious, to kind of like define and be honest and truthful with yourself about not what society's told you, not what your parents have told you, not what you think you should, not any of those shoulds, but actually, who you are and what you want your life to mean, what you want people to be saying about you, your eulogy, and the difference that you made, and all that kind of thing. So, how clear are you? Because, as we've said earlier on, that's where our values come from. That's what we anchor onto to make sense of how we do difficult. That's what's at stake. That's like what our motivation is. That's what will help us decide whether or not we're going to do whatever your thing is. Then, and let's think about this in the context of the suffragettes. So they go, we feel exceptionally strongly about the lack of equity for women. We want women to have the vote. That is our single-minded thing. That is what our life's mission is going to be around, and that's what we're going to do. Then you go, okay, if I'm going to make possible, if I'm going to make that happen, if that's what my life is going to be about, what I'm going to achieve, do I have the skills, the knowledge, the competencies, the abilities to be able to make that thing happen? And sometimes we might not, and that's okay. Then go, how do I get those things? Is my internet connection all right? I've had a note saying it's unstable.
Yeah, it's saying it's a little. I'll say, well, I can still hear you fine. So just keep going. Wave at you if it goes.
I'm the most life in my near on 50 years at the moment, as it happens. So it would have been ironic if it had said that. So then we go, do I have the skills, the abilities, the competencies, the knowledge, and all that sort of stuff? If you want to do something that's really, a step check, changing your career. I've done that one. You've talked about that, leaving, moving country, leaving your partner, whatever it might be. Do you have the things that you need to be able to make that happen? So that's the confidence bit, so that you know that you're going to be okay, whatever the outcome is. Then the next thing we go is connections. And this is about connection to yourself, to your emotions, to the environment, to the systems, to the stakeholders, those that you've got responsibility for, whatever that might be. And critically to the people that will be impacted by your decision. Because nobody ever does anything in isolation, ever. Even record holders that have they all train with people. We have that, whether they've got coaches, whether they've got teams, whether you're an entrepreneur, you'll have an advisory board. Nobody does things in isolation. So how you connect to the abundance of resources, emotions, data, information, networks, people is one of the critical things in order to be able to do difficult things. The suffragettes had no knowledge whatsoever about how to influence policies, how to campaign, how to lobby, how to form a party, any of that stuff. They had to learn all of that. They didn't, Emmeline Pankhurst is the one that everybody talks about as having got the vote, but it was a whole community. It was a whole network of women that did that. So actually, it's also about connecting to other people, you recognizing that you're not on your own and you are part of a collective. And then the final thing then comes to, because all the letters are like be braver, so it's beliefs, experience, resilience, So the final bit is to do with bold action and risk and resilience. So understanding what your own risk appetite is. Are you risk averse? Like having a sense of what risk can you afford to take? I can only afford. I used to think I was really risk averse. I'm not at all. I have a limit to the financial risk that I can take at the moment. There are 1,000,001 things I would absolutely love to do, but I am a single parent. I've got a mortgage to pay, so I have to be astute about my financial risk. Intellectual risk, emotional risk, all that I can go to town on that. So knowing where your risk tolerance is, and then ultimately knowing what the action is. So going, what is the smallest action that I can take initially, the first step, the first uncertain thing that I can do, and where are the things that I could actually potentially reverse? So I could maybe focus on those things first of all. So I think how we get to making a courageous decision is recognizing that there's a before, there's a during, and there's an after. I think in that there's a film, isn't there, about we bought a zoo or something like that, and there's the line where he says it only takes 3 seconds of courage or whatever. It doesn't. It's like it's a lifetime's commitment being courageous. And actually, to be brave washed, you have to be brave ready. So it's getting in all the things in place first, recognizing the fact that there's loads of uncertainty, being confident that you're going to be okay, whatever the outcome is, because you are the most together, brilliant version of yourself today that you have ever been. And that no matter what life throws at you, you're only doing this thing because it matters to you more than anything else. So it's worth the risk. And actually, not doing it has a risk also. So not doing the thing sometimes also carries risk.
I mean, I love this whole brave ready idea of the work that has to go in beforehand to then be courageous. And already I'm ticking off a few things on my list and I'm going, yeah, I do know that about myself. When you were talking about sort of the risks that you are willing to take in these different areas, financially, emotionally, intellectually, I was thinking, interesting. I need to think about that. What is the furthest that I can push those? And then you're then taking courage from a knowledgeable position.
Yeah.
And it makes it less scary, doesn't it? Because then you know where you're coming from, as opposed to this recklessness that could potentially.
Yeah. It's like it's a strategic tool almost, isn't it? And I think the other thing that's worth remembering as well is like the way that our brains work. And normally when we're thinking about things that are uncertain, what we're focusing on is the things that we want to avoid and all the things that could potentially go wrong and all the things that we're forecasting that might not be desirable. But there's also when we move towards things that is growth, learning, uncertainty, whatever, we discover things that we're opening ourselves up to new opportunities, to things that we couldn't have predicted. And it doesn't always mean that actually what you're going to get is worse. Sometimes it can be different, but better. The amount of times I've gone to new business meetings or gone to clients or pitched proposals or spoken to clients, and it's not, it's or reached out to people whose work I admire. And fear of rejection is the big one, isn't it? We all want to belong, we all want to be accepted, we all want to be acknowledged, and the fear of rejection is an absolutely horrible one. And sometimes, a lot of the times, I probably get rejected more times than I get accepted, or whatever you would say. But that can sometimes lead to beautiful other things, new connections, different opportunities, different conversations, things that you would just never have predicted. Moving here onto Substack, for me, I feel so exposed about my writing. I've had this conversation with you. I've met Lisa Bennett, who I've had some amazing conversations with. All sorts of things that you would just never have imagined. And if I'd just been sitting at home thinking my writing is really absolutely terrible, nobody in their right mind would want to read it, so many things wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. And I think that's just such a great example of you using yourself. We've talked about some of the things where you've assessed yourself, assessed where you are, where you're able to make risks. And you said you could go to town on intellectual and emotional risk. And perhaps that's the reason why you came to Substack in the first place. And I think, I'm very similar. I think when, I was terrified of doing things like lives or podcasts or anything like that. But then I did go through a process, unbeknownst to me, where I was assessing the risk of the situation, going, well, what's the worst that could happen? Well, people could laugh at me, I might forget my words, I might not be able to do X, Y, Z. That's all right. And because I'm okay with that level of risk, I'm all right with that. I don't mind if that happens. And then actually what's come out of it is so many connections with incredible people. And feelings of joyfulness, feelings of expansion, feelings of potential, which has made me want to be even more courageous and even more brave, because I'm like, well, sometimes I think we have the idea in our head is I want to be brave because I will get this thing. Sometimes you don't get that, but you get all of these other aspects of it, which are absolutely incredible. And I think that is just such a beautiful thing for you to say is just taking that step of courage. You have no idea what that's going to lead to. Now, before I ask you for your last piece of advice, I just wanted to pick up on one phrase that you use quite often, which is quiet courage. What do you mean by is quiet courage?
So when I was talking earlier on about the fact that as Western culture, I think we are acculturated to sort of think that courage and bravery looks a certain way, and it's very loud and it's very visible and it's often very physical, running into burning buildings or fighting in wars. In fact, I recently uh upset somebody on LinkedIn, which sort of made me think, well, actually, maybe I'm getting somewhere if I've upset somebody, saying that I was diminishing the bravery and the courage of people that work in the armed forces by suggesting that, you know, quiet courage for me would be, you know, uh, a young black woman in a technology business that's been invited to a senior leadership team, and has her ideas spoken over, and speaking up about that and saying something to somebody about it. That is courageous because the risks are far greater for her. We know from all the research that, women behave in certain ways and they get penalized for it in organizations and all that sort of stuff. And to the point that you were saying earlier on as well, um, you know, we should never. I get really upset when people say to people, particularly like if I don't know, people that have got cancer or whatever, oh, it's so, you're so brave. Um, the person, quiet bravery, personal bravery, often, for all the reasons that we've been talking about, only the actor, the person doing the brave thing, very often is the one that knows that it was brave, because they are the ones, particularly if it's like psychological courage, they know how they perceive the risks, how they perceive the threats, what has happened to them in their lives, how they experience that environment, what's gone on. I have in one of my models, I've got commendable courage, and visible bravery as being actions and decisions that anybody in society that did those things, that would be recognized as a courageous and a brave thing. But I think quiet courage and personal bravery is those moments that you have, that you when you know that things were hard and difficult and uncomfortable for you, that nobody else can judge the measure of. And actually, I feel like they are the types of bravery and courage that society doesn't actually want people to notice of themselves, never mind of each other. Um, and, when I get quite um, political and feminist about things, I suppose I could sometimes think that, it could also be like a tool of the patriarchy that doesn't allow women particularly to recognize that they are courageous. Because what would happen if we suddenly, I do this thing in talks that I give where I'll say, put your hand up if you know somebody that in your life or your organization that's brave and courageous, and like 100% of the people will put their hands up. And then I'll say, raise your hand if you consider yourself to be brave and courageous, and about 10% of people will put their hands up. And if we're telling ourselves that we, as you were saying at the beginning, don't have the courage or the bravery, so the first thing, the simplest thing, tell yourself you are, and look for evidence that you are, because you are.
Mm-hmm. Looking for evidence that you are courageous. I mean, I love what you've said about the quiet courage, and obviously there's lots of people being celebrated for these acts that we see on the television or wherever else they may be. But that is so important. And, I think sometimes we diminish our own courage because, I'm going to be completely honest. I haven't been to London for a really long time. I went to London a few weeks ago. It's the podcast show, which is brilliant.
Oh, I saw your post about that.
Yeah,
Look fun.
had the best time ever. But it took quite a lot of courage for me to get on that train because I was thinking, oh no, I don't know that I can do this, talk to all of these people. Why am I doing this? All of that.
Mm.
And that was quite a courageous act for me to do. And it led to something brilliant. But I didn't celebrate myself for that. I didn't say, well done, you, look what you did. Isn't that brilliant? I didn't say that to myself. I was just like, oh, well, you got on there. That's what normal people do. They go and do that. And imagine if we celebrated ourselves every single day when we did something where we pushed ourselves that only we know about to do something that is just that little bit further out of our comfort zone or something that we're worried about, and how good that would feel and the momentum that would give us. It'd just be
Yeah.
phenomenal.
What is the fear that we have about commending ourselves for our own courage? What is that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just trying to think about my own personal experience. Why would I not do that? And I think it's because you measure yourself against other people and you go, well, I'm not as courageous as so and so. I'm not as courageous as that person or whatever. So therefore, this cannot be courage.
But the only person that knows the measure of your courage is you. And actually, you can't. So often, when we see what we think is courage in other people, it wasn't brave and courageous for them. I've got one visual that I've got when you're talking about my artwork, and I'm still not convinced it works properly, but I've really tried to visualize the concept because I think it's really important for people to understand it. But often when we see courage in other people, we're measuring it by our own experiences, our own resources, our own values, our own whatever it might be, not theirs. And very often, if you ask people about something, you say, "Was that brave or courageous for you?" You'll get a very different answer, and we can make a lot of assumptions about it, which, as you're saying, diminishes us. And comparison is conformity anyway. Like, who wants to compare themselves to other people's courage? Own your own, and allow yourself, you know, be your own best friend. Like, if your best friend did what you did and told you, "I'm going to go to this podcast thing and I really don't feel like I could do it, but I'm going to do it anyway," and then they came back and they'd done it and they told you all the things that you know of it, what would you be saying to them?
Yeah, exactly. You'd be like, oh my goodness, this is brilliant. Look what happened. How amazing. What are you going to do next? All of that kind of stuff, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Honestly, I absolutely adore talking to you. I, Everybody that's either watching this live or is going to watch the replay later can feel what I feel in this conversation, because it's just there. Not only is it courage and not only is it joy, it's sort of like very much a lion energy you're making me feel at the moment. And of course, yeah, like, let's go. And just feeling like the idea of pushing yourself out there is a way of standing up to society's expectations or comparison or what we're being told we can or can't do. Like, it feels bigger than just, I'm going to go and do X, which is just,
It is. And I love the fact that you think of it as a lioness, I'm going to say, not a
yeah,
lion. Because lionesses are in prides, and they're fierce on their own, but they work in packs, don't they? And we are, collective. I don't actually mean collective courage, which is a whole different model and concept, but collectively, courage inspires courage. It's contagious. We know from research and we know in organizations, particularly, if people talk more about the risks, the fears, the difficulties, the uncertainties, the hard things that they've done, it gives other people permission to talk about it. And then we can all start to celebrate and recognize each other and know that we are capable of doing really difficult things and we have been doing it. And once you start to not be scared about it and recognize it for what it is, you can then start to, like we were talking about before, you can then start to strategically think about, well, what more becomes possible now?
Yeah.
Like I have no, I've totally let go of like fear of failure, perfectionism, all that kind of stuff. I do the best that I can with everything. I give my all to everything, and I never want to fail, and I never want to do badly at things. But I acknowledge that if I carry that fear around with me for my entire life and never risk doing anything, I'll have lived a quarter of the life that I want to live.
Yeah. I mean, what is the last? I mean, I'm definitely getting you on the podcast because I've got about 50 questions in my head right now. Like, I can't believe I've got to finish this in a minute. But what is the last piece of advice that you could give somebody that's watching this right now and they're thinking, right, what's the one piece of advice I can take away with me about how I can be more courageous? What would you say?
Um, I would say, what's the smallest? Why do you want to do the thing, whatever the thing is? Um, how does that? How does doing the thing, deciding on the thing, move you more towards the person you know yourself to be and the person that you want to become? And what would make you most proud of yourself for having done?
Mhm.
Um, make yourself proud. Be your own best friend. There's a know that it's a practice and it's something that it's a commitment that we live by. It's not a trait. It's not you either have it or you haven't got it. It's not an emotion. It's not a feeling. It's not reckless. It's none of those things, but it curl in the heart. And I sometimes think about it as like a raging heart. And like if once you know really why you want to do the thing, whatever it is, or make the decision or stand up for it or say it or whatever, um, you get to the stage where it's just impossible not to do it. And remember that it will reward you in unexpected ways that you can't see. And that's the gift that will be waiting for you on the other side. So you can be excited about waiting to see what that will be as well.
Yeah. Just so brilliant. And I just feel like I'm going to get off this live now. And I just feel so enthused. I'm just going to be working now for the next few hours. Just that little bit of ignition you've given me through this conversation. It's been brilliant.
What would you say is one of the uh, something brave that you've done? So you said about the thing recently.
Mm.
Um, something brave that you've done um, that you think would be useful for your listeners to know about as well?
I think, there is the classic, the fact that I just gave up my job without having any plan whatsoever. But I think the biggest risk that I've taken is to put myself out there, to identify.
Mm,
And this person that, that's always been there, but I was afraid that perhaps wouldn't be accepted or shared or people would enjoy their stories. And all my stories are around the forgotten bond with nature and how we can become closer to it. And that was very much a childhood dream. But I think society and conditioning pushed it out of me as like, oh, that's a geeky thing to talk about.
mm,
That. And the fact that I talk about it so often and so publicly, I think is the bravest decision that I've made. And I think it's a beautiful decision because it being who I am has brought all of these amazing people into my life, including you. You're stuck with me now. And, and having all,
I'm grateful for your courage too.
and all of these conversations. I mean, the phrase that you used about the fact that courage is contagious is something that I'm seeing in all of the people that you must chat to on Substack as well, and that I chat to. Is when people start to see these small acts of courage, they go, "Oh yeah, I think I can do it." I mean, I remember one person commenting on a note that I'd written once, and he'd said, "I don't feel courageous enough yet to do the things that I feel like I want to do, but reading all of these stories of other people really supports me and gives me the boost that it is possible."
Yeah,
And I just think that's brilliant.
yeah. It's the ripples of change that it creates as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I keep thinking of things I want to say. I could talk to you for like hours.
Right. So when we get off this, I'm going to send you a link to the podcast booking and you're going to come on and we'll be on there ages.
I'll book a day.
Yeah. We might have to have like multi episodes or whatever. But
Yeah.
I think the only thing that I'm going to say to people that are on here now or that might be watching it on the replay, if you've got questions or elements that you want covered, make sure you post them in. Caroline will see them. I will see them. If people want us to do another live about a different topic, we can do that as well, because I think there is so much that we want to talk about. And I'll let you know once we've recorded the podcast and we can put it out there and everybody can listen.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I've really loved it and I can't wait to chat to you again.
Oh, super. Me neither. And thank you to everybody that stayed here and listened and been here throughout. It's been really lovely to be in your company.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had some great comments coming through. So it's been really brilliant. Well, thanks so much, Caroline. And we'll speak soon.
Will do. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.